Today we're going to, in general, like I said, talk about things that are very tangible in training. So I wanted to do a talk a little bit different. I'm going to do this called Making the Invisible Visible. So in general, I consider two sides of the coin. There's the visible. These are the sets, reps, percentages, regressions, progressions, program design, even business model and business plan. These are the visible components that you learn in school and that we read about and always want to get better at. But I think there's only one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is the invisible. And this invisible is the subtle, unseen components that breathe life into your place, into the people, and into your environment. And this talk is going to be specifically about this because I think it doesn't get enough credit, but it's equally important. If you walk into certain gyms, like a Boyle's or Verstegen's or even a DeFranco's, you can feel it right away. It's inspiring. On the surface, nothing looks different. They have the same layout as you, or similar. They do the same exercises as you. You might have even taken the exact program from them. But there's a buzz at their place, a feeling, and you know you want it at your place with your athletes and your clients. You can't see it, but you know it's there. Do these certain people just have a knack that we can't do anything about? Or can we make the invisible visible for us as coaches, trainers, and athletes as well? That's the purpose of this talk. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it's not there. Nice. Let's further narrow down the invisible components, because I believe that there are two components to the invisible, both the conscious and the subconscious. I think the conscious is focused on the most anyways, but the subconscious is still this mystery. In traditional coaching, like I said, targets conscious anyways. So I'm going to leave that to the side and go specifically on the subconscious. And I've created a framework that I'm going to give you at the end. That's a general way to organize all this information because there's a lot coming so that you can take this and try to customize this to your situation. But first I want to go into a little bit more detail about this. Two questions. Can we access the subconscious? Because if we can't, there's no point in wasting time. We know it's there, and it's a huge piece, but if we can't do anything about it, we don't need to spend any time working trying to get better at it. We want to spend our time on things we can make a difference with. And second, if we can, what can we do when we get there? So if we know that we can get there, what can we do? Well, Inception is an awesome movie. It's also a very complex storyline, but the reality is it's simply just trying to plant a seed. While it may seem complex, like I said, it's simply the idea of just planting a seed in someone's mind. It's a great idea, right? Get all of our athletes and clients to love training as much as we do. But is that even possible? So that right there is the divide between the conscious and subconscious motivation, in my opinion. Traditional coaching is aimed at the conscious mind. It speaks to you directly. The intent is clear. We use things like explode, great job, or you can do it. That we're going to keep in the conscious portion of coaching. That has its place, but that's not what we're going to talk about. The subconscious is different. This is meant to go instead, the subconscious instead is meant to go below the radar. Whereas the conscious is clear, subconscious is below the radar. Before we get into this though, we need to address, is it even ethical? If you could do what they said, is this even ethical? If we're going to talk about it, we need to determine some baselines of what we think is okay and isn't. I think most of us would agree no. That's ethical washi right there. But before we go any further, I want to read you a message I received this month actually from a former high school student at the time who's now finished college and is at his first real job. He says, "Hey Brad, I hope all is well. I was at the gym today and it made me think of you. I want to quickly thank you for pushing me to start working out. In high school, I was an awkward theater kid who hated the gym and the notion of jocks. But somehow you caught me and forced me to start working out. Your care and dedication meant a lot back then, and it still does whenever I go to the gym today. Now I actually enjoy working out. I feel that many high school coaches would have ignored someone like me and focused instead on the athletes, but you didn't. I really wanted to thank you for that." Now, does that sound ethical? I think we'd all agree, absolutely, and it's actually what we want to do as coaches with our athletes and clients. So I think if we consider it that way, we're fine with nudging them in the direction that we know they want to go. So now that we're a little bit aware of what this is, we need to be able to define it and start to see what the invisible is. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes going over a couple of very fascinating studies. And these studies are meant to lay the groundwork for which we're going to build upon. I think that these studies are very clear in showing that priming is what they call it priming, works on the subconscious. And you're going to find out that it might actually work more than you ever possibly realized. So when you guys first walked down this hall, when you got to the 3rd floor, it was about 100 yards long. Imagine when you got here, I had this on your seat. It was a scramble word test. And all you had to do for each sentence was take 4 words out of the 5 and make a sentence out of it. Does that make sense? So the first one, you might say, she was always worried. And you go and you do each one, and there's 5 words, and you take 4 of them and make a sentence. This is a short example from Blink, and you continue to do that. Once you've completed a longer version of this, you just walk back to the end of the hallway and turn it back in. Pretty straightforward, right? Most of us think of it as a brain teaser. Well, it was much more than that. With this short test, I would have affected the way you had behaved. More specifically, I would have made you walk back to turn it in slower. And this works almost every single time. And I would have done this all without saying anything. You wouldn't have even known it before, during, or after. How, you ask? The sneaky creators of these scatter tests sprinkled in words like worried, Florida, silent, old, lonely, gray, etc., that subconsciously make you feel old. The key was it was so low level that it did not inform the rest of your brain. But it was just serious enough of a message that it made you respond to it. Don't believe me? They've conducted this test multiple times, and it's worked over and over again. In fact, they've done a bunch of these similar tests, but they've influenced different actions. A similar hallway version, with a slight difference when you turn the test back in, was they had someone stand in your way. And you just had to say, excuse me, I need to turn this in. That's the only difference. But with this, they changed the scattered words. In one group, they had words that made you think about being patient. And in the other group, they had words of agitation or angry. With that simple change, people waited twice as long, double the amount of time to turn in their test. What's more, 82% waited so long they had to stop the test. They waited so long that they're like, okay, we're done with this test. They outweighted the amount of time. And what's more, they never knew it before, during, or after. Even when asked afterwards how it affected them, they looked blankly at them and said, what? So simply changing the words from patient to agitated or angry, and those key words, without people knowing, made them wait double as long. Now at this point, it's important to point out that priming is not brainwashing. I think that's key. The authors want you to know that, and they want you to know that it cannot get you to do things like rob a bank, steal a car, or even give away your credit card number. Instead, I like to view it more of a nudge. It's just kind of a subconscious nudge. So, now that the previous studies influenced how you behaved, could we also influence how someone did on a standardized test, even without them knowing it again? Shockingly, absolutely. When they did these on standardized tests, for only 5 minutes before a test, they primed somebody, either positively or negatively. It influenced their standardized test by 15 to 50%. And they had no awareness of it. Even after the test, if they did better or worse, and they asked, they had no idea they were being primed. That's significant because we think we have control over our test. We understand maybe the emotions of feeling old, but 15 to 50% on a test. So priming influences your thoughts and therefore your performance. It sounds like they could be pretty useful for us as coaches, huh? If you're like me, though, at this point, you want to know why you're so easily tricked or nudged or influenced. The researchers believe because of the sheer amount of volume that we have to swim through, that's why. According to these authors, the conscious mind has to process 40 pieces of information per second. Every person I've told they get overwhelmed by the amount of it. Every second, we're consciously picking up 40 pieces of information. But that's nothing. At the subconscious level, we're picking up 11 million pieces of information every second. Because of this, the decisions have to be made below our consciousness. If not, nothing would ever get done. So our brain has to do this. So our brains aren't gullible. Instead, they're amazingly astute at picking up insane amounts of information and processing them all on multiple levels, both conscious and subconscious. Our brain does all of this to save valuable time and energy. So it's happening. We want to know if we can do something about it. So far, we've seen that we can be influenced to affect our emotions and even how well we do on test scores, up to 50%. But can we be influenced into working harder without even knowing it? Because if we can, now we're really starting to talk about our field. This is something that as coaches and trainers might be extremely helpful to us. Luckily, Cohen and Walton have done the research for us. We don't have to do this. They've done a study where they had two groups wait to do a task, and beforehand, they had them read a few one-page articles, bios on people. In the control group, that's all they did was read bios on people. In the other group, in the bios, they changed one thing, the birth date, to match the person reading it. So if I was reading it and I was in there, they would have had a birthday that said August 19th. And then I would have gone about and read all the other articles. Then I went on to take tests and see how hard I would work, how much I would continue to work harder until I quit. The people who were in the birthday association group worked 65% harder and longer on these math problems, simply by having their birth date be in one of the articles they read. 65%. If we could get our athletes and our clients to work 65% harder, that's amazing. Now, what weight room application is there? The key, I think, is that the association wasn't even real. It was invented. But it still worked because they didn't know it. It happened below the surface. This is huge for us as trainers and coaches. This study shows that having an association can make a huge difference, and that association doesn't even have to be real. They just have to feel it subconsciously. Now, not every athlete or client really likes to work out that much. If you own a gym or train people, you're going to realize that not everyone loves it the way we do, but they still come to train with us. But we also know associations made these people work harder. And they feel it was because A, they felt a connection, and they felt they were part of something. So if we can capitalize on that, we can get them to work harder, doing what their ultimate goal is anyways. I think this is golden information that we just have to be able to capitalize. This information was out there, but it's been in different journals and studies and hasn't been maximized by strength and conditioning coaches and trainers and business owners yet. So the research is definitely clear. I've given you only a few of literally dozens and dozens of these subconscious priming studies. But having this information is only half the battle. Now we need to create a framework. With this framework, I'm going to give you 3 steps I think are important. 1, we need to plant the seed. Or the planting of the seed has to happen, either from us or from someone else. They have to have the seed planted. Then they need to light the fuse, the inspiration. But like anything, they need to also keep it going. So if they cannot get inspired, it doesn't do any good to keep us going. But if they get inspired and leave, then it doesn't do us any good as well. So let's dig a little bit deeper to show how to maximize this framework, and then you can customize it to your own situations through time. I initially viewed planting the seed as a separate category from lighting the fuse. But I think as you'll see and I saw, they're kind of one and the same, but there is a bit of a hierarchy. First of all, with this, what do we want to accomplish? I want to accomplish getting people to buy in to working out as a lifelong habit. And I'm sure you guys feel the same way. And we know the people we train want that. That is a noble and fair goal. Are there any current existing limitations with this? I would say yes. I viewed people getting inspired to work out as an internal thing. I think that you are either born with it or not. It's from you. I would say my new viewpoint, which I'll get into as I come up, is that that's not the case. That it is actually externally inspired. And it has to come from priming. How can we influence this? The studies up to this point have shown that we can indeed direct, nudge, or influence someone. We can get them motivated to try harder, also based on associations that are real or even created by someone else. This is great to cultivate an environment. But can we plant the seed, like I said, or equally important, can we harvest a seed that's already there? Why is it that so many people who start training never see it through? They start and then stop, while others who started the exact same time as them do it the rest of their lives. This is the million-dollar training question. Luckily, Gary McPherson has done a lot of research in a different category that's going to help us out. He conducted a long-term study seeing how musicians improved compared to the amount of time they practiced. And what he found was actually something, he found what he was looking for, but he also found something else too. So what he was looking for was if people started practicing at 20 minutes, 40 minutes, or double that, was their improvement correlated to that? What he found was he also asked them a question before they started ever practicing. And the question was, how long are you going to do this? And he kind of poke and prod to get them to say it. And finally, they got folded down to a couple possibilities. Just for this year, for a few years, for the rest of my life, were what he basically summed it down to. What he found was that the people that practiced only 20 minutes a week, the lowest amount, but said they were going to do this the rest of their lives, improved greater in 9 months than the people who practiced double that time but said they were only going to play for a year. So he found that people, that the amount that they practiced was significant, but the amount and their mindset was more important. Were they going to do it the rest of their lives, or were they going to do it for a short period of time? And that trumped how much time they spent practicing. Think about that for a second and now transition that to our field. We view the first-time clients who come to us as like blank slates. But in reality, they already have a concept of how long they're going to stick with this. It may be subconscious or conscious, but they kind of know. And the view that they bring to them will greatly influence how much better they get in the gym with you. Because the people who, in these cases, spent less time working but had a long-term plan still made a better impact in their performance than the people who spent twice as much. So you'll think of the people who come in maybe for bridal showers or to get ready for, like I said, for a wedding or for an event. Those are short-term people. And these studies show that their results will not be as great as people who come in less time but have a long-term plan. And that's huge because that's our business, that's our lives, that's our financials. So the greater influence, that was more important than the time they spent practicing. Can we do anything about that? We know that now. Can we do anything about that? Can we ignite that? Now that we know, there's anything that we can do subconsciously that helps them paint the picture of themselves as lifelong worker-outers? Because if we can help them paint their own picture as being a lifelong worker-outer, we know statistically they're going to get better results. And we know they're going to stay longer, and we know they're going to be happier and healthier, and we're going to have better businesses, which is also important. Before I started this research, I would have said no. I would have said that you're born how you're born or you are who you are. Certain people like it, certain people don't. Certain people will come for an event, get thin for their wedding, and quit. But now I believe that we can have an impact more than I ever thought. And research is consistently pointing to this. Whether it's internal or external. And now we're finding out that external inspiration actually ignites internal fuel. At the subconscious level, this external inspiration kicks on a fuse in us and plants a seed, and then we feel it as our own, like in that video clip. But that's the benefit. We perceive it as internal. Remember they said in the video clip, you can tell when something from the outside comes in is not your own. But when it's subconscious and it's external, you perceive it and own this idea as your own. These people will perceive these lifelong habits as their own. So we can positively motivate and inspire them. So planting the seed. The old framework, I would have thought, was that everything, like I said, had to be internal. Either they had it or they didn't. 50% of your clients were going to quit. It's the reality of our business, I thought. I thought it was internal. Now I'd say my new framework is that planting the seed can come from, and it needs to come from external priming, but it has to remain subconscious. Because if they know it's conscious, they can shut it off. But as we saw with the walking slow or the test scores, if it happens below our level and we're not aware of it, you can't shut it off. So, taken from the talent code, here are a couple quotes that he talks about in this. Ignition is about a set of signals and subconscious forces that create our identity. The moment leads us to say, that is who I want to be. We usually think of passion as an inner quality, but the more he says I visit hotbeds, the more I saw it as something that first came from the outside world. So this man spent years researching talent places, and he's realizing this is coming from external sources. He goes on to say, ignition is a strange concept because it burns just out of our awareness, largely within our unconscious mind. But he says that doesn't mean it can't be captured, understood, and used. So the research is starting to come to this conclusion. We can reshape how someone feels about working out positively, both for them and for us. So once we get them to buy in, the second step is keeping it going. Because getting someone to buy in general is a very delicate process. But keeping that passion going long enough to have it become a part of who they are is equally important. And if you've trained people for a long time or you haven't yet, you're going to realize that is an equal part of the puzzle. And lucky for us, Carol Dweck has done some amazing research in this. What she has done is tested the power of an external praise. And what we're going to talk about here is the significance it had. She did two things in a test. She said one sentence to someone. Can we sum this down to 6 words? Either you must be smart at this, or you must work hard at this. That's it. That's all the difference in the questions. Either you must be smart at this, or you must work hard at this. Do you guys have any idea what the response would be? It's pretty earth-shattering. The group that had the response to you must work hard at this performed significantly better, statistically significantly better. They also worked harder. The reason they believe this was that their self-worth, when told you must be smart at this, got tied to it. And once they believed and felt that they were smart and others thought they were smart because they told them that, they did not want to fail. They wanted to keep that image of being smart solidified. And when presented with harder versions, they either declined on the harder versions or did worse. However, though you must have worked hard at this group, did better in each successive harder version of tests. They also tried harder on longer, impossible tasks, where the You Are Smart group opted out. 6 simple words, that's it. Either you must be smart at this or you must work hard at this. Made a 50% difference in their scores. What's worse, the You Must Be Smart at This group did actually 20% worse when retested on the same test the first time. So once they did the test, got praised and complimented, did other tests, came back, because they had the idea that they were smart, they actually did 20% worse. But the group that was praised for working hard did 30% better. This all happened at the subconscious level. They performed better, worked harder, and worked longer, simply by 6 words said to them. We can't think of anything less, right? To make such a difference. Let's extrapolate this into our field, because that's awesome, but we need this to work for us. You must be good at this is the phrase I think is now very negative. and you must have worked hard at this is our positive. How you compliment someone matters. Do not compliment someone at being good at something. This is a hard fight to fight because we're programmed to say this. But saying, you are fast, or you're strong, or you jump really high. Because once you do this, their identity gets tied to that and they don't want to let it go. It solidifies. Now they won't try harder on new things because they don't want to lose that label. And when someone new comes along, and they will, and that are better than them, they won't dig in their heels and work harder. They'll just quit. And it's proven over and over again. Instead, compliment them on how hard they work. They will then become they will identify themselves as a hard worker. That is a better measuring tool for them. Because now improvement is always an option. That's an expanding mindset, whereas the other one is a shrinking mindset. They can only do worse if they already think they're smart. But if they're a hard worker, they can always do better. Like I said, they can always see themselves as improving when they label themselves as a hard worker. What's more is it's contagious. They will want to continue to work harder on new challenges, which is great for us as trainers, right? And they are less afraid to fail or to not be their best. We need that in people we train. It's a much better mindset for our athletes and clients to be in. And if we want them to stick around for the long haul, this keeps the people you train coming. So we have to use this type of language. And once we use this kind of language, they'll get themselves to be considering themselves as that kind of person. Once we've done this, we can continue to reinforce it. In the studies, it was a 50% difference. Can you think of an easier way to encourage and keep your people training? We're still going to use all our visible training qualities on that side of the coin, our great program design, our continue our knowledge. We're going to continue our conscious cues, but now we can add this 50% bump in the subconscious that no one else is doing or not aware of. And the best news that I found also is that this effect is actually enhanced during high adrenaline situations. Sounds a little bit like training with you, huh? This means that after high adrenaline output, they are more suggestible to re-editing who they are in their mind. What a great time to compliment how well they did, huh? An analogy that works well is that their mind is like wet concrete in that moment after a high adrenaline situation. And we can write on it what we want, and when it dries, that now becomes permanent, and they see that all the time. So here's what not to do. Do not give negative feedback directly after a high adrenaline situation, because they're writing their script of who they are. Same thing, don't correct a bunch of mistakes. You can absolutely correct mistakes when you're training someone. That's part of training. The intent is clear. But afterwards, some facilities, which I'll talk about later, only are geared towards correcting a bunch of mistakes afterwards, so they think they're enticing you to come back and get better. What they're really doing is solidifying themselves as a non-ideal situation. We don't want to do that. And we do not also want to compliment them on their talent. You're really strong. You're really good at this. Because then they're setting themselves up like the You Are Smart group, where they only think of themselves as being that, and they don't want to ruin that image. So do not do these things. So my central conclusion would be that in the beginning, priming needs to actually be external. They need to think, if they can do it, so can I. But to keep it going, priming needs to be centered around being internally motivated. This means that when they start out, they need to compare themselves to others to see what they want to be. But you cannot point this out. This has to come in below the radar subconsciously. Maybe you could hang success stories in your gym of all the people who've done well, or put them in a group with people that they might idolize. But if you make it aware to them consciously, they can tune it out. So their external motivation has to inspire them subconsciously. And that will prime them, and they will take that on eventually as being their own identity. But once they've bought in to what you're doing, they need to then compare themselves to themselves to build on being a hard worker. Because progress doesn't always become linear, as we know with time. They need to be able to rest on their efforts of being a hard worker and stick it out during that long haul. This is like having success journals or keeping track of their workouts. They need to buy in to compare themselves to themselves once they've started the process. To me, this was counterintuitive. I always thought that starting in the beginning, it needed to be internal, and then you used external motivation to keep you going. Clearly, I was wrong. This is why a record board might kickstart your drive, but it won't sustain your motivation for your whole life of working out. The framework of influencing the subconscious is ultimately for their own good. I think that's the key. Our parents made us eat vegetables, and we now realize that it was a good habit to build as adults. The same applies to teaching healthy exercise habits. Use your subconscious as a vehicle or tool to access a person for a lifetime of health and happiness, I think is a noble thing and worth learning as coaches and trainers and business owners especially. It is what they want after all. Sometimes they just need a little bit of a nudge. And as trainers, coaches, and business owners, our success and survival is geared around making people move and feel better. If we can take advantage of sliding below the surface and having a positive impact on people and our own lives as well, it's honestly lazy not to maximize this portion of knowledge. The best trainers and the best places have these priming cues built into their environment. Maybe on purpose or not, but they're already there. You can feel it, but you can't recreate it. Or at least you couldn't because you didn't have the key. Now you do. Thank you.